I want to thank you for the opportunity to come here. I've been off and on coming to this meeting since it was started, and have been playing around in the Uinta Basin for a long time. I feel like in a room full of people who actually work for a living, when a scientist stands up and talks, I kind of have to establish my bona fides here in front of you a little bit. So tell you a little story, and you can suffer through it. One of the nice things about having the lectern is that you get to tell people what you want to tell them, and they have to listen for a bit. As a young boy in the middle 1970s, my dad was he was always a truck driver. My dad's a truck driver, and he used to truck crude oil out of Uinta Basin to Western Refining back in those days in Salt Lake City. And he used to let me ride along with him, and we'd make 2 rounds. So we'd come into the basin twice a day and haul crude back. And as a young boy, I would look out the windows, and I was fascinated. First of all, the fact that there were dinosaur bones down here was pretty amazing, but also the geology was fascinating to me. And I would beg my dad to stop that truck along the road so I could look at the geology. And I remember one time we kept driving past this black band in the rocks, and I wanted to look at it so badly. And so my dad pulled off on the 2-lane road with that load of crude and let me go up and collect a handful of gilsonite to take for show and tell back at school. And ever since that day, it was kind of the start of when I became really a geologist in training. As much as I loved driving trucks with my dad and driving truck as a young man to get through school, the call of what was going on outside the windshield was more intriguing to me. And what happens in Utah is really exciting right now. You can't help every time you cross the border to come into the state to feel the energy. We're involved in a lot of different activities, as Laura said. One of the things that I get the privilege of doing is, Senator Winterton mentioned it, the legislative board advisory board on critical minerals is a big deal for us. We also work on a regular basis with our friends at University of Utah and our friends at Utah State. Guys like John Gervais and Joe Moore have been influential in moving forward this concept, what I'm going to talk about today, which is geothermal energy. Now, when I start talking about things, I can get plenty excited because I'm truly passionate about this, and I've been waiting for 35 years. I've been a practicing geologist for 35 years, and I've been waiting for things like geothermal and critical minerals to be cool again. And so finally, if you stick around long enough, everything comes around, right? Skinny ties, fat ties. You stick around long enough, a geologist becomes one of the cool kids on the block again, and it's truly been the case over the last few years. So at Idaho National Laboratory, geothermal energy has been in our DNA from the very inception, nearly the very inception of the laboratory. Of course, we were established in 1949, as Laura talked about. But back in the late 1970s, shortly after President Carter sat by the fireplace and said we needed to conserve energy, INL began to invest in geothermal. And in fact, on this slide you see right here, Idaho National Laboratory developed and built the very first binary cycle power plant. And the reason why that's important is it allows you to extract work or to produce electricity from water that is not in and of itself able to turn a turbine very efficiently. So you convert that hot water into another working fluid like isopentane or hexapentane that has a lower flash point, and it then can turn a turbine. So nearly every power plant being built across the world today is being built on this technology that was tested and proven at Idaho National Laboratory in the early 1980s. And in fact, that power plant is still operating today because of the research at Idaho National Laboratory, Utah State, and University of Utah that has enabled that power plant to increase it produces more electricity today than it did back in the early 1980s when it was built. So geothermal power is not just a transient opportunity. It is an opportunity that is generational, multi-generational. These power plants will get built and they will produce power consistently and predictably for generation or more. So I think that's one of the real beauties of what that presents, is that this is an opportunity of not only today, tomorrow, but our grandchildren will be reaping the rewards of the facilities that we build today. And so we're really proud of that heritage. You can still go visit the site. One nice thing about going past the Raft River site, it's just north of the Utah border in Raft River, so just north of Malad, that area there, is you can drive by it back and forth, and you never see the power plant. You have to literally drive up the road to the gate before you start seeing the power plant. That's how small the footprint is to produce 13.5 megawatts of energy. Now, when you talk about geothermal really is the energy of today. Now, I work at a national laboratory, and I am drinking the nuclear Kool-Aid. There's no doubt about it. I think nuclear is the future. I think we have a lot of huge potential for nuclear, and it will drive energy in the coming decades. But today, geothermal represents that opportunity, and really the western United States represents the peak of that opportunity. So if you take a look at this map, you can see where geothermal energy really has its focus, and you notice it's no coincidence it's focused in the area with the prettiest geology. That's because geologic systems, as they develop and as the Earth goes through its evolutionary processes, it creates the systems that are conducive to allowing geothermal fluids to come closer to the surface so we can capitalize on them. Any place you go, so even in Washington, D.C., you could drill right through the swamp, and if you drill deep enough, you could get to geothermal resources. The problem is you have to drill very deep, and it's very expensive. So the West is really where the potential is. So from a national focus point, when I first started into geothermal research back in the late 1990s, geothermal was really based on one technology. That was what was called hydrothermal systems. And those are systems where you have hot water, and you have a well, and you can bring that hot water to the surface. You can turn a turbine with it, and that's called traditional hydrothermal. Today, geothermal covers a wide swath of technologies, everything from water that's bath water temperature to systems that are what we call super hot or supercritical. So I'm pretty agnostic to the temperature. Give me water that has some heat in it, and I'll do something beneficial with it. And so when we talk about geothermal today, we're talking about geothermal is across the whole of the spectrum. Notice I didn't say hydrothermal, I said geothermal. That is heat that's coming from the earth. And that heat comes from the earth. It can come in a variety of different forms. We can use different working fluids like carbon dioxide or other working fluids. Typically it's water or brine. But give me some heat and we'll do something beneficial with that heat. It's a good thing. I'm going to have to speak. I don't even know what is going to be going on behind me because my eyes are failing, I guess, and I can't read what's on my slides very well. But I'll talk to you a little bit about advances that have been made, and Utah's on the forefront of those advances that have been made in geothermal. That is, so if you take a look at what's going on in Milford right now and what University of Utah and Idaho National Laboratory and other places, other institutions are doing at the Forge test station. So Forge is going through its third cycle of funding. We're not even finished with the full research deployment of Forge. And companies like Fervo have turned and said, because I don't drink beer, I said, hold my Mountain Dew, I've got this. And they've started developing the resource right there while we're still doing the research. So Fervo's developing a couple 100 megawatt geothermal operation right next to our research operation. So we're still sharpening the blade of the cutting edge of geothermal at Forge, and literally right on the boundary, and some of those wells crossing the boundary, companies like Fervo have moved in and said, technology's advanced enough, you've de-risked it, let's go forward. And that's really the role of the federal government, is to de-risk technologies where the private sector can't capitalize those risks. The reality is it costs about as much to drill a geothermal well as it does to drill an oil and gas well. The energy density of boiling water versus a barrel of a barrel of crude is orders of magnitude different, right? So it's very hard to get venture capital or capital at all to roll into something that has high risk and low energy density. So the federal government comes in and says, listen, let's go ahead and de-risk that. We did it in fracking and horizontal drilling. We did it in Forge, and now in private sector is moving forward with literally hundreds of megawatts to help drive the AI of the future. Carbon dioxide has been on everybody's mind for a long time. If you've been in oil and gas for a long time, you've felt the pressure of carbon dioxide issues. We have a brief quiescent period right now during this administration, but the rest of the world is moving forward with it. If you can use really low-grade geothermal and you can combine it with that carbon dioxide you're injecting in the ground for CCS, you can increase the reaction rates and secure that carbon dioxide much faster. I can speak English, I think. Much faster, and you can do it much more securely. And in the traditional geothermal realm, there are huge potentials. There are thousands of megawatts, and I'll talk about that in just a second, of potential literally waiting to be drilled right now, waiting for us to be able to move those rigs onto the site and drill them out. We just simply need to be able to be advantaged equal to other renewables to be able to do that. And then the last thing is we're working on, in fact, we have a project that's going on in the Paradox Basin now. We're working on the Smackover Formation in northern Louisiana. That is the recovery of critical minerals from these brines. A lot of the brines that come up that are heated also carry with them some of the metals that are most interest to us from a national security and from an energy security point of view. So from a geothermal potential, let me give you some numbers, and I hope they mean something to you because these numbers are truly huge. So from geothermal identified resources, places that we know to drill today, there's over 7,800 megawatts of potential right now. So if we could just get the rigs on them and we could get the permitting processes right now, there's over 7,800, and even if only half of that, that's 3,500 megawatts of geothermal potential we've already as scientists and engineers, we've already discovered the place, so we just need to go drill them. Undiscovered resources are estimated at about 40,000, between 37 and 40,000 megawatts. These are numbers that are just so large they don't even mean anything, right? Is that even if only 10% of that is real, the numbers are astounding. Significant untapped potential. The USGS estimates in forge-like applications, like what's going on at Milford right now, that there could be in excess of 500,000 megawatts of geothermal potential. Now, these numbers are so big that they're hard to get a grasp on, right? But let's just say that even a fraction of these these predictions hold true. That means that we don't have to worry about energy going into the future. Our electrical generation is secure. With the natural gas that we can produce, with nuclear and with geothermal, we become an energy-dominant nation, and we don't have to worry about the influence of other nations in our energy security. And then I'll talk about briefly one of the areas that if you just look right out in front of the headlights, just a little bit, it's like looking for deer coming down the highway last night, just in front of the headlights. One of the opportunities out there is what we call super hot systems. And these are systems that are above 300 degrees Celsius, meaning that they're above the critical point of water. And we don't even know what the theoretical limit is. It's right now it's considered undefined because the theoretical limit is so long. It is so high. And really what's standing in the way right now, it's not in super hot systems, it's technological, really. We don't have the materials, we don't have the pumps, we don't have the drill strings that can do that kind of drilling. We have to invent that kind of stuff. But everything else is technologically ready today. We could deploy these technologies, we could deploy the resources and bring power plants online in under 5 years. I talked about this a little bit in my previous slide, but really geothermal has many forms. There's the conventional form that I talked about where you have a permeable system, you have moving water, and it's very hot, and you can produce power directly from that. Enhanced geothermal systems, like what's going on at Forge, where you have very high temperatures, but you have no flow. You have no water flow. You have to have something to carry the fluid. So we go in those systems, we create a heat exchanger down there, and then we flow the water through it, and we bring it to the surface, produce power, inject it back down in there, and it's a very low water consumptive activity. And then there's sedimentary, or there's geothermal heat pumps that can be deployed at a building, at a house, in anybody's backyard. And then there's geothermal energy storage. One of the things I do is we waste about half of the BTUs we produce in this country. And most of those BTUs that we waste could be recaptured. So every time I go by a data center, or I even walk by INL Supercomputing Center, and it's a real anathema to me, is that on one side we have a big cooling tower that pushes 13 megawatts of thermal energy out to the atmosphere to cool those supercomputers. On the other side of the building, I can stand and look at both of them. We have a 2-inch gas line that goes in the other side, pushing gas into that building to heat it. And so we've got 13 megawatts going out one side, and we have a 2-inch gas line coming out the other side, and it was just a matter of, this is of course of doing business, that we've always done it that way. Well, now that we started to develop some of the technologies that we have in the Earth systems, is that we can capture that energy, we can put it into the subsurface, we can bring it back when we need it, and we can heat our buildings with it. And so many of the AI data centers that we're talking about coming in the future are looking very serious at this. And we're in partnership with a number of the big companies like Meta and with Google to look at these systems to be able to recapture their hundreds of megawatts of thermal energy so they can heat their buildings with it. basically reducing the amount of energy they consume by about 25% simply by recapturing that energy. I don't think that went forward. So there are challenges with geothermal. So I'll give this talk and I'm all excited about it, but the question is why? So like Laura said in her talk, we haven't really built any nuclear reactors. Vogtle came online in the last couple of years. That's the first new reactor that's been built in my adulthood. And so why is geothermal not being built? Why aren't we doing it? Well, it's simply not been on an equal footing with the other renewables. So the way that Congress behaved in the previous couple decades was that they advantaged wind and solar way over geothermal. And because of that, it became much easier to get capital into those systems, and there were tax incentives. Geothermal didn't ever receive those kind of incentives. So today, geothermal now is on an equal footing with those systems, and we also realize that we need firm baseload power, and geothermal provides that. The other renewables do not provide that. So I put that in red. That's simply the biggest reason why we haven't done it. And the other one is that, I can go on a hill, I can put up an anemometer, and I can measure wind speed. I can look at it over a period of a year. I can come back and say, I know I can produce X amount of megawatts of electricity with 120 wind turbines, and that's really low risk. It's not very appealing to the viewscape, but it's really low risk. But when I say below my feet down here, there's 50 megawatts of thermal energy that we can generate, electricity with. There's risk in that. What if you drill the hole? What if you drill an $8 million hole and you don't produce? What's going to happen then? So it creates this vicious cycle in this whole process. Is you go to the financiers and say, I want to drill a geothermal well. I need some money. And they'll say, well, show me your power purchase agreement. So you go to the utilities and say, I need a power purchase agreement so I can get money to drill a well. And they say, well, you got to show me spinning reserve in order to get that power purchase agreement. And you say, well, I can't do this. You go back to the financiers and they say, well, yeah, we still can't do that. And still nobody shows up to drill and de-risk that hole. One of the problems we have is in the United States, we've drilled 4.2 million oil and gas wells. Now, some of those were disposal wells. Some of those are production wells. Currently, we have nearly 1 million wells in production that are producing oil and gas. How many geothermal wells do you think we have globally since time began? We have about 1,750 total across the globe that have been drilled. That delta in the number means that risk for drilling geothermal is much higher than it is for oil and gas. Oil and gas hit rates went from 1 in 10 to 1 in 2. Why? Because the number of wells went up and up and up, and we learned more and more about the subsurface. Geothermal needs that step change. As Secretary Wright has said, he wants 5,000 new geothermal wells in 5 years. I don't know if we'll ever get to that number, but that would sure help. Instead of having 1,700 geothermal wells, we need 17,000. And then we need the nth adopters to move in. And then you'll see the price go way down. I'm not going to spend much more time on this. I put this slide together because I wanted to let you know that there are a lot of challenges. And there's reasons why it hasn't been deployed. In some cases, we have spinning reserves sitting in places like the Geysers, California, and purchase agreements went out, and organizations like Stanford University chose to buy wind and solar over geothermal because that was much cheaper to buy. So it really has been some strong headwinds to move geothermal forward, and we're starting to see some quiescence, we're starting to see a calm in that storm that helps us move forward. As we know, geothermal is a stable baseload power source, and that's a big deal these days because we've pretty much reached the limit, or we're very close to the limit of how many renewables we can put onto the grid. The nice thing about the way new geothermal plants are being conceptualized now is they can run in load following mode. So they can make money when they need to idle while there's peak renewables in the system, and then when the demand comes up, they can turn the valve and turn those geothermal plants up and make money selling into peak markets. But with geothermal, it's a different sort of beast. You have all of your capital costs up front, meaning you buy all your fuel on the day you build the plant. Meaning when you drill the wells and you build the plant, the fuel comes to you nearly free, the cost of lifting that hot water to the surface. So you have to be able to get over that initial capitalization cost, and that's where we have been non-competitive with the rest of the systems. Most of the other systems buy your fuel incrementally, or in solar, you had a price support or a tax benefit. With geothermal, all of your energy is in place on day one. and you don't ever need to bring any more energy in. But that means you have to pay more to start it off. And so that's been an activation energy problem that geothermal's had for some time. The permitting process is also, they're huge stumbling blocks. And to be honest with you, geothermal has never really been given its due justice with respect to prioritization or to its true value proposition, which it's always there. It doesn't change. It's base load, small footprint. That has never been, we've never had the ability to capitalize on that and to have that be part of our market plan. Right? Not even in the state of Utah or in Idaho is that value proposition given that geothermal has that advantage over other types of renewables. The permitting process can be just cumbersome. I heard it said today, and I like to listen to these talks, NEPA's never stopped one environmental catastrophe from happening. All it's done is stop development from moving forward. So a need for NEPA reform will be widely and happily accepted in the geothermal community. In Idaho, one of the companies, a Utah-based company you may be familiar with called Zanskar, has been trying for 2 years to get a permit to simply do a geophysical line at Mountain Home Air Force Base. In Idaho, the process of getting a permit is so convoluted and so unreproducible that it's taken them 2 years just to get that permit. We need a significant effort to streamline that process. There's no reason it should take 2 years to get a permit to drill a discovery well. And so we're starting to learn those hard lessons. We've not paid attention to things like critical minerals and geothermal for 30 years. As a result, we're sitting in a place now where we're scrambling to try to make up for lost time. All right, now let's go back to some happy stories. Last week I was talking at Energy Week in Utah, and we spent a lot of time talking about the storm clouds, but there really is a parting of the clouds, and there really is an opportunity here where the sun is now shining, and Utah is really at the forefront of that opportunity. Forge, it's like I said, Forge has already led to adoption, right? Before we even finished the research, Fervo was jumping in, and they were buying up the lease rights, and they were moving forward. In Idaho last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a geothermal lease sale. We set a record for the cost or the price paid for unit blocks for geothermal leases by a factor of 300%. So we had blocks going for $420. And you know who was buying those blocks, who the whales in the room were? They were some of the biggest solar companies in the nation. That's who was buying that's who was buying those blocks at those ridiculously high prices. I'm glad to see the prices coming up, but even traditional renewables like wind and solar are seeing the advantage of geothermal and are starting to move and hedge their risk in favor of geothermal. The huge untapped potential is immense, and it simply can't be ignored anymore. Zanskar just last Friday announced a new discovery that was discovered by the use of data and AI. It's a blind system that people knew there was heat in the area, but they didn't know where the heat was. Using AI and some advanced new technologies, Zanskar, you can go read about that. They just made that discovery, and it's pretty exciting. The potential for recovery of minerals as a value add also advantages geothermal and makes it more cost effective. And then these basins, like we sit in here today in the Uinta Basin, these basins are not considered in that geothermal potential that I talked about. Why? Because they've traditionally been oil and gas reservoirs. We know they're hot, but you can make a lot of money producing 100 barrels of oil a day. You can make zero money producing 100 barrels of hot water. So you have to be able to, when you look at these systems, even though they're hot, you have to figure out a way to get enough flow through the system to be able to extract enough work to make that system pay for itself. So there are some challenges in places like the Uinta Basin. That temperature is really attractive, but we need to figure out a way. You can't pull enough hot water up through an oil and gas well to generate power. You can do direct use heating with it, but that's a long way from any kind of infrastructure out there. So figuring out a way to get from these sedimentary formations that exist widely across the United States and across the globe enough thermal energy out to generate power is one of the things that we're working on. And we're working on that with some of the institutions in the state like University of Utah and Utah State. And then I think I've probably covered this slide in quite a bit of detail already through the course of my talk. But I just wanted to I want to leave you with the concept here is that we are on the cusp, just like we are in the cusp of the nuclear renaissance. We are on the cusp of the geothermal renaissance. But there are some things that are holding us back and that we need to be aware of. And those things are that we haven't built any new plants in a long time, and so there are very few providers. If you want to buy let's say you want to buy a mile of insulated pipe to get your hot water from your well to your power plant, it's $1 million a mile just for the pipe. The reason is because there's 2 suppliers in the world that provide that, right? So the price is commensurate with the demand. Once that demand goes up, you will see a commensurate reduction in price. This is one of the slides that I want to leave you with because it really shows you the magnitude of what I've been talking about. This is something we put together here, and it shows the various energy sources out there, and then it shows where geothermal sits with respect to its potential. Now, potential is not always realized in its full state, but what it shows here is that there is more potential for energy in the geosphere than there is if you combine all of the other forms of energy that we've ever produced, right? So there's a place for all energy states, but the magnitude, again, I keep coming back to that, the magnitude of the potential of geothermal is so great that we're not able to ignore it anymore. So you can see there that we're talking about terawatts of power potential. And then I talked about this a little bit, which is the ability to take waste heat and store it and then reuse that waste heat. So we've done a number of studies on that with our partners across Utah and across the national lab space. Is we take that reject heat, we put it into the earth. The earth does some things exceptionally well, and it's a very good insulator. So if you put heat down there, you charge that earth battery, that is, you heat that system up, you don't lose that heat. It stays with you for a very long time. Then you can pull it back up, and you can use that heat to heat your buildings with. The one thing that we're missing there is that there are over 2,800 deployments of this technology in Europe, and there are 2 in the United States. So we need policy adoptions here to make that feasible. In places like Salt Lake, along the Wasatch, there's a lot of thermal potential in that area, but we don't use any of it for kind of the beneficial use like we do in Boise with their direct use heating system. I think this is close to the end of my slide deck, except for the one last one that Laura talked about briefly, which is geologic hydrogen. So this is where, if we talk about super hot systems, that's greater than 450 degrees C. I told you it was 350 degrees C. Operationally, we use 350 degrees C. For this figure here, it's at 400, meaning it's incredibly hot. This is drilling into systems that are very close to magma chambers. Right, so we're only if we double the heat, we melt the rock. That's how hot this stuff is. So you can see the distribution of where this heat resides, and you can see again the Western United States is full and has lots of potential. And I think that's where you'll see federal government investing and de-risking it, because if you can produce a system at 400 degrees Celsius, you can extract a lot of work from that. Meaning you can generate a lot of power, you can produce a lot of industrial benefits from that kind of heat. It's a total game changer. And this is where we're focusing a lot of our blue sky effort. And my last slide here, that's just how you would advantage that. The last slide here that I want to talk about is something we call geologic hydrogen. Another thing the Earth does really well is it's sitting down there 24 days, or 7 days a week, 24/7, it's making hydrogen. And that hydrogen is sitting down in the subsurface of the Earth, and it's never been extracted, or the mechanisms understood that create it. Geologic hydrogen has great potential in states like Utah and states like Idaho and in the western United States. And there's an opportunity there because geothermal and geologic hydrogen are part of the same family. You have to have heat and you have to have water. If you have those two and you have iron in the rocks, you can produce geologic hydrogen. We've drilled the first 2 wells in the United States to produce hydrogen from geologic systems. They're both in Kansas. They're at about 1,650 meters, so they're not all that deep, and they'll be our first producing hydrogen wells in the United States. The amount of hydrogen that we have in the northern Rockies is ridiculous. Water at Yellowstone is saturated with hydrogen, meaning that system is actively producing hydrogen every single day, and it's making its way to the surface. So the systems south of Yellowstone and around northern Utah and around the eastern Snake River Plain have huge potential for geologic hydrogen. This is another area where you'll start seeing some real, you'll start seeing, in fact, if you watch the press like I do on this, you see people making announcements on a regular basis. France the other day just made an announcement that they have the world's largest geologic hydrogen resource. You see lots of this strutting around claiming that folks have the resource, but really nobody's ever proven that we can get it to the surface. Utah has great potential. You have the right rocks, you have the right temperature, and you have the kind of traps needed to store the hydrogen. So I hope you got a little bit of a sense from me today, a little bit about where geothermal is, where it's going, the opportunities that are there, and the technologies needed to extract the geothermal from the subsurface, just like I think it was Chase that said it this morning, are sitting in the basin today. Bring those folks from the basin out onto the geothermal systems. Let them drill the holes. Let them produce the hot water. Let's make some power, and let's solve our energy problems that we'll be facing in the future. And let us be net exporters of technology, net exporters of energy, and net exporters of the clever people needed to run these kind of systems globally. I appreciate your patience with me and listening to a geologist talk about the Earth a little bit. We're going to invite Laura to come back up here and answer a few questions, and I thank you for your patience.
I don't know if we have time. I think we're a little long. Do you want us to, one question? So I have one question for Travis, because I think you all will find it very interesting, which is, if he can briefly tell you, because a lot of the work we did here certainly that he demonstrated here, a lot of the technology comes from oil and gas, and appreciate our work with them. But we also have opportunities for critical minerals here. So if we have 1 minute, I think you might find that fascinating.
Yeah. So there are already people, there are startups, and there are already folks looking at the mineral resource and the resource potential associated with the oil and gas resources here in the basin. And the biggest problem we have is not that they're not here, it's that there's a giant 800-pound gorilla in the global economy, which is China, which is controlling the floor prices on those. If we can get to a place where the floor price is stable and secure, you'll see developments in places like the Uinta Basin to not only recover oil and gas and make this a minerals basin, and in addition to being an oil and gas resource or carbon-based basin. So I look forward to that, and I look forward to the kind of the technology advancements as the federal government makes those investments to make recovery of those metals from those systems really important. I think the Uinta Basin is only going to become more and more prominent, as we've heard from the rest of the speakers today, and that critical minerals and the mineral supply chain is just one more of those bright, shiny stars that Utah will have in the global market.